Hello and welcome to the M&A Science podcast. This podcast is part of a mission to rethink how M&A is done. The old school seller-led approach, it's dead. Buyer-led M&A is all about strategy, alignment, and efficiency, putting value creation at the center of every deal. And let's be real, it's not just about closing the deal. It's about making it successful. We uncover what truly works in M&A by learning directly from the best. I'm your host, Kison Patel, CEO and founder at DealRoom and chief scientist here at M&A Science. I'm joined by John Palusci, recent strategic finance and M&A leader at BAYADA Home Healthcare, a mission-driven nonprofit organization delivering home health, hospice, and personal care services across the U.S. and globally. John played a central role in scaling BAYADA's acquisition strategy, building a repeatable M&A engine tailored to the complexities of a highly regulated, people-first healthcare environment. He's worked across the full deal lifecycle, from sourcing and diligence to integration, with a sharp focus on long-term value creation and mission alignment. Today, we're digging into how he helped shape a buyer-led M&A model inside a nonprofit structure, how to evaluate deals as a permanent owner, and what makes or breaks a healthcare acquisition. John, how you doing?
Great. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming to our DealRoom office in Boston, baby.
Congrats. Yeah. Looks great.
Yeah, the home is growing, kind of getting a little bigger. I appreciate you taking the time so we can do this live. Can we kick things off a little bit about your background?
Sure. So you mentioned, recent leader at BAYADA, focusing on M&A, probably a non-traditional, non-linear M&A background. I don't know, a ton of people who start in M&A, but I definitely didn't. Went to school for chemistry, of all things. And by the end of that, had a real high tolerance for pain, for the details and really complex things, and wanted to do anything but chemistry by the end. But then from there, found BAYADA really in an IT implementation gig. It was their first attempt to get off of a very old legacy, somewhat paper-based system into the early electronic medical health records stuff. And so I got to learn that business soup to nuts really quickly, because you were replacing every process with a new system. And so I was getting into like the whole data, things moving around between systems, how it all came together. And through the integration work through that's when I actually learned accounting, was from an IT perspective, which I don't know if I recommend for a lot of people. But I went from there to getting into analytics and data warehousing and trying to connect data to financial results. And that's where I got into forming my relationship with the CFO at the time, because I was the one pulling reports for him for quarterly management meetings and earnings reports, and got to sit next to him during big deals and see how it actually came into play. And that was like my first exposure kind of into M&A. And then was working with him for a while, focusing on just running the business. And then he and the founder said, hey, you should probably learn finance, how it really works. And they supported me going to Wharton. I did Wharton on the weekends, their executive MBA program. And that's where I got to really learn, the real high finance, and fell into taking a corporate valuation course. And that's where I loved like the work, like how it actually works, the discounted cash flows, the comps, building the detailed models, and wanted to take that back to BAYADA to actually implement those like frameworks, which are textbook frameworks, into how deals get done. But then when I went back after the MBA, I chartered the FP&A team. BAYADA was maybe $1 billion at the time. And, I was the traditional, grumpy finance leader, always saying no to the deal team. This is too expensive. Do you understand what would need to be true to justify this? They called me Dr. No. And then after a few years, we did the deals anyway, by the way. But after a few years of doing that, the CFO said, "Hey, would you like to be on the other side of this and be on the deal team, find deals that you'd say yes to?" And so that's when I really started, being on the front end, working with the corp dev leader to source and find the deals. A lot of it was inbound, but to really frame up deals from that standpoint.
Hey, so you're like really like organically homebrewed.
Very much so, yeah.
Product for the M&A team. What did the actual like deal journey look like? How many deals have you worked on, and what types of deals?
Yeah, no, so I mentioned I'd like sat alongside like a few deals very early on, like pre-MBA. But when I really got into M&A was when BAYADA was on its joint venture with health systems journey. And so that was partnering with health systems to either, BAYADA contribute operations to form a new venture, the hospital contributes theirs, maybe both are contributing, or you're starting from scratch to build something new. And so in those transactions, and I think I did 6 of them during my time there, like you're doing 3 or 4 deals in one, right? You're valuing yours, you're valuing theirs, you're valuing what it looks like when you put it together. You're arguing over value. But then the end of it, you're not walking away, you're married, right? And you're working together to make sure that the sum is greater than the parts. And so most of my chops were cut on those joint venture transactions that, again, I was involved in bringing them to life, but then I was also like the CFO over the portfolio after the fact. And so I actually had to live with, the pro formas I had underwritten, which, really tailors how I think about deals, right? It's all about, it's not just about getting the deal done and chucking it over the wall, right? It's about living with, what you buy and the value you said you were going to create. And so I got to live through that for about 5 years in the joint venture world. And then after that, after the sort of the JV engine slowed down, it was returning back to traditional, tuck-in acquisitions, market entry, typical, things where you do sort of part ways at the end of it. I think over the course of the career, it was maybe 10 to 15 transactions, that we ended up closing, but looked at a ton along the way, but only ended up closing, 15 or so.
From up until now?
Up until now, yeah.
Wow, that's still a good run. I'm curious, you cover the whole life cycle. What's your favorite part of the deal?
Yeah, and this is like, I'm an academic at heart, and so the valuation process is like my favorite, right? Because you're getting into, I grew up in like the discounted cash flows, school of valuation. Like, yes, there's comps and what other people pay, but ultimately it's, what the seller would be doing with it if not for a transaction. It's what you'll be doing it after you buy it. In healthcare, especially not-for-profit, you have to typically get a third-party appraiser to come in and do a fair market valuation. And sometimes you've settled on a purchase price and you're just testing whether you fall within, a third party's opinion. Sometimes you'll say, we'll let the third party determine the purchase price. And so
interesting.
You've got this other, often jointly engaged, but an objective stakeholder like determining your purchase price. And both sides are part of the conversation and, influencing, the deal, which is mostly discounted cash flows. And so you get to see both sides' sophistications, assumptions. You're ultimately arguing over what a generic third party would come in if they bought this thing and how they would run it. And that determines the value. And so it's all very hypothetical and academic.
That's what I was curious about. It's like, from what I've learned, the valuation is based on the perception of value from the buyer.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's very much buyer led, and it's fun and interesting. And then, oftentimes, the appraiser is kind of calling the baby ugly, right? Yeah. Which is a tough position to be in. But if you structure the conversation right, you've got a really good partner in the appraiser who's done a lot of these, knows what good looks like. They can smooth it over, but at the heart of it, you're really agreeing on where the value is coming from. It's not just throwing numbers out and, agreeing to one and then debating it later. It's all has to ultimately be grounded in reality and practicality. which is really fun. And you get to work with really smart people on both sides. And you build it together. So, I mean, it can get stressful because you probably come to ultimate disagreements on things. But it's all out there and there's really nothing to hide behind.
Yeah, that's always the challenge. And I'm personally exposed to it now on what I'm working on, but just the bid-ask spread.
Yeah, right.
It's always a gap there. Have you learned anything to bridge it and make it that part easier?
Yeah, I mean, it's
get the third party to.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I feel like that would be worse. They fight more.
No, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's making sure that there's good alignment on the partner for sure. And sometimes, to help smooth things over, like they have their preferred appraiser, and so you work with them, or you may have your own, or you both so happen to like the same one. So you want to make sure there's trust in the appraiser. And then ultimately, the appraiser may come back with a result that the seller or the buyer doesn't want to buy into. And that could just end the deal right there. Like there's some gross, misalignment of what either side thought the value was, and that could end the deal.
I never thought about using a third party. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's the equivalent of having your bankers, go at it with their models, right?
That's true.
But they're, the alignment of bankers is, maybe different than the buyer and seller. And so you have to be wary of that.
Well, in most processes I'm working on, I don't want them to be competitive. So I try to keep the bankers out of it.
Right, exactly. So having a neutral, arbiter is not the right word, but like someone who's jointly engaged, representing both sides, just trying to get like a good academic answer that,
And you guys do that pretty often? Use a third party to...
And for not for profit, like you
almost have to.
You have to, and you can either do that. Third party is always the best and most defendable. Other times, if it's a small enough deal, it may not be worth the price, and so you can attest and have good backup that like you're paying fair market value. But yeah, the bigger the deal, the more likelihood you're going to want a third party to at least check your math.
What's your sourcing engine look like? Because you mentioned you look at a bunch of deals, but then you end up doing a handful of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly inbound. You build relationships with, in the home health space, there's only a few brokers. There's a few big ones and then lots, it's highly local. And so, BAYADA is a big place and they show up on the Google search for the presence. And so a lot of it's inbound. Maybe we'll do a little bit of looking if we know exactly what we want. But it's a lot of, it could be the list that you get from like, the brokers like, hey, here's what we have for sale versus like a very directed like connection. The CEO and CFO have got their own connections. And so people reach out to them directly for ideas. And then probably like less than 10%, like there's a bank involved, investment bank or something that brings it to us. But those are mostly in the minority.
So not a lot of investment banks, but there are like brokers basically.
There are brokers, yeah.
And then most of your deals comes from the brokers.
Yeah, and it's all sell side. Very few buy side brokers. It's all like sell side.
I've noticed that in highly fragmented sectors that they end up with a lot of brokers that just make a great career out of just.
Oh, I've definitely just we've run into one or two where like it's a guy, and he just makes his like little connection, and he doesn't do much. And he gets a piece of it, and he just rinses and repeats. And it's a good gig if you've carved it out.
Yeah, if you go deep in that niche, and it's just again fragmented, and you got very active buyers like you out there. And what is in terms of building your funnel and sort of the stage gates? What does that look like for your organization?
Yeah, it all starts with a really clear and stable strategy where M&A is like referenced explicitly. I think the hardest. Where we probably had trouble initially was when there was not clear criteria from the top that you needed M&A or that it was important or where you were going to choose to play. And so making sure that it's very explicit so that you have always something to refer back to, whether it fits in is unclear. But strategy is usually pretty high level.
Clear criteria, that's a big thing. That's definitely a buyer-led.
Absolutely, right. And then it's for the people who are actually helping with the buy decision or, in BAYADA's case, like the operators who are going to be accountable for the results. It's like, what markets, what size, what, is it a long tenured business? Is it just the opportunity to enter a market? Sometimes it's just like buying something really small so you can land and expand versus buying presence. And so it's getting really clear on that because, I think as I mentioned, like our funnel is really wide and gets really narrow because so many things. I think a few years ago, we were really seriously evaluating almost everything that came in. It was a lot of time for everyone, for us, for the operator teams to like look at everything. You were basically saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And most operators like growth. And so they're like, yeah, sure, I'm interested. And then you spend a lot of time and then something comes out of the woodwork and, you throw it away. And so it was trying to get to know as quickly as possible on everything that comes in, whether it's, the quick reply from that inbound email to know after a few hours of work to know after maybe, a week or two of work. Having very good criteria, filters, just makes everyone's life easier.
Yeah, get to go, no-go decision faster.
Yeah. Or gates, right? It's like, hey, we're going to go from, just 2 people knowing about this deal to 5 people knowing about working on this to 10 people, working your way through versus like go is, release the hounds on advisors and teams. It's being thoughtful and stageful about it.
Or is your big drop off? Like what are the big reasons why you would pull a deal out of the pipeline?
In healthcare, highly regulated, and the regulations are often state specific. And so, unless you're already in the state and know how things work, you may not be super smart on it. And so a lot of the times the states or even the federal government gets in the way. And a deal physically cannot happen. Like in Medicare agencies, for example, the actual license to bill Medicare can't change hands more frequently than every 3 years. And so like, if it comes out of the woodwork that like, oh, you actually bought this provider number 2 years ago, like you can't do the deal.
Wow.
Like there's nothing to buy. or the state, isn't friendly to outside, participants coming in and setting up shop or, so you're looking for, those regulatory hurdles that will stop you from doing a deal. Other red flags are, and we'll probably talk about this later. It's like, and definitely in healthcare, definitely in home healthcare, like it's a very public community interest industry. And so the sellers are usually the founder. And they want to make sure that their people are taken care of, their clients are taken care of, and maybe even the way of doing business remains the same, even if that's kind of what got them into their situation. And so sometimes they want to put like requirements, like you're going to keep this person or you're going to, not care about the payer mix, which can, make or break a deal. They put requirements on you after the deal that just don't make sense for the buyer. And so like, again, in some deals you part ways, but sometimes you're buying something from a company, you're just buying a part of a company and they're remaining behind and can actually influence, how successful you are, post-close. And so you want to be on good terms, but if they're going to require you to not run the business the way you want to run it, that's a reason to kill the deal.
The state regulations, the founders got some interesting requirements. BAYADA is a non-for-profit, which is fascinating. We've talked about this in previous interviews that BAYADA was a for-profit, converted to nonprofit, which I thought was like a pretty, this is a multi-billion-dollar company.
Oh yeah.
Can you tell us like a little bit of that story for reference?
It's incredible. Everyone should Google it. So the founder, Mark BAYADA, started the company 50 years ago and kept it, privately held through, 2000s, early 2010s. And, he wanted to make sure that the mission and values like continued into perpetuity. Like the true founder wanted like the lasting legacy to be left behind after, his time. And so lots of research into how this has worked in the past, other founder-led transitions. And he ultimately landed on transitioning to a not-for-profit is the ultimate way to cement in, how BAYADA was operating. Because that's part of being not-for-profit is you set your mission and your vision and all those kinds of things, and they really can't change and you can't go against it or else you lose your tax-exempt status. In 2019, it was the official conversion to not-for-profit. I was doing FP&A at the time and I helped them with that. But it was giving up a multi-billion-dollar, equity event, maybe for his family in the future, to truly double down on the mission and values, which were always there. Like the mission, nothing changed in the operations as a result of that. If anything, it only kind of validated, what he was doing and really actually installed a lot more discipline in how decisions were made now that you had like an independent board, for example. That was something we didn't have before. And you didn't necessarily have the founder behind you to, make up for your mistakes financially. It was all about being independent and doing the right thing.
How does being a nonprofit, and that's like really epic, by the way. Like it's
I think the last time a transition like that occurred was like the Mayo Clinic in 1912, like that big give up in the conversion. Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah, just a lot of value to give up, but for the greater cause. As a nonprofit, how does that change the way you do M&A?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. And I think when we talked about this last, like it kind of forces you to do M&A the way you're supposed to.
Tell me more.
Since when you're a not-for-profit, you have a singular mission and vision. And if you acquire something that deviates really far outside of that, outside of your core competency, like it puts you at risk. And so it kind of narrows your scope of focus a little bit. Of course, you can acquire things that totally do what you do. But when you get into adjacencies, like, we're going to look at tech platforms that support home care, or we're going to look at a particular provider network that is about increasing quality in the community, you have to watch those guardrails. And so it keeps you from becoming like that corporate conglomerate that's just about, optimizing returns and improving your cost of capital. It has to remain focused. And so, we all know people get into trouble when they sort of get outside their core focus, right? So it forces you to stay in that. But the other piece that it gives you is, since you can't really be buying things for the sole nature of selling them in 5 years, right? I mean, financial sponsors that are either looking to sell or they're looking for like the next big recap or the infusion of capital. Like you're buying something to own it forever and run it forever, and not necessarily turn it around and sell it. And so you have a longer, you can have more patience with a deal, right? You're not necessarily looking to grow it like crazy for 5 years so you can sell it. You can wait a little bit, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, maybe longer. BAYADA had a 100-year vision. A deal hopefully doesn't take 100 years, but
so that means you can pay more.
What?
That means you can pay more.
It doesn't, and that's where it can get tough because your time horizon may be longer, but your time value of money comes into play. And so, someone pricing for an event in 5 years is looking at what they can sell it for, EBITDA multiples expansion, all that kind of stuff. Like there's a short term like cash infusion that ultimately comes out of that. And not-for-profit, like that's not necessarily there, or may take a really long time. And at some point your discount rate, overtakes that. And so your ultimate, purchase price, which in my world is reflecting your discounted cash flows, time value money, all that kind of stuff, like it probably pushes your purchase price down as a result. And so it can be seen as not as competitive, but it's because you're someone who's selling to a not-for-profit is not, if it's the right partner, not just doing it for like the big payout. It's all the other reasons, of joining a mission-oriented organization. Which,
right. They're not going to pay premium. What about like risk tolerance? Because I know you got to stay true to the mission, but does it give you leeway to take bigger bets?
Yeah, it does, because you can be more patient. I mean,
Interesting.
I'd say like our risk tolerance it's interesting. Like we've probably gotten less tolerant for, liabilities and like things that come out of the woodwork. I mean, in healthcare, liabilities can pop up 7 years later that had nothing to do with you, right? But it's not something that the acquired company did that maybe they didn't even know about, but it still follows you after, even if in an asset transaction, it can follow you. And so being really thoughtful about, how you structure indemnifications, escrows, and kind of success reliability. Like, is that seller going to be around in some, capacity in 5 years to maybe make good on fixing that liability? That's something BAYADA focused on a ton. I would say it probably lended us more towards focusing on less like the big bang acquisitions and more like hey, we're going to buy into a market and then expand on our own time, and get more of the cash on cash returns from like the organic growth after the fact. Less so like we're just buying revenue kind of thing. It changed definitely. I don't know if it was necessarily like the not-for-profit stuff or just me coming in as a leader for how we looked at deals, but it definitely changed some of the tone and tenor for really only executing on surer things than we used to.
What do you measure on financially? Because if, for example, private equity's bottom line is IRR, then what's your...
No, I mean, we're looking at the same thing.
You are, okay.
Yeah, it's IRR, NPV, that kind of stuff. And as we're looking at things, like it's always grounded in what needs to be true to at least hit the hurdle rate. It's not necessarily your downside case, but it's your conservative base case of like, let's at least be able to meet your cost of capital, which maybe is a little bit risk adjusted. Not trying to hit like a MOIC of 3, 4, 5 or something crazy like that. It's much more grounded. And so to some sense you would think it would be allow you to pay a little more because you're trying to optimize the denominator in a way, I think. It's still the textbook fundamentals of corporate finance. Granted, plus like if you're for BAYADA, it's like you're serving more people, you're employing more people, you're creating greater access. Like there's all those non-financial things that you're hitting as well that don't overtake the financial fundamentals, but like are part of the story.
This question might be a little redundant, but let's try it. So buyer-led M&A is all about putting strategy and post-close value at the center of the deal. How do you screen early stage deals through that lens to get to a no quickly when it's not aligned?
Yeah, I think we covered it mostly, but it's really good, filter gating criteria. And so knowing what you want out of it, I think is big. And that all comes from the strategy and not like asking your leadership to recreate the wheel on every deal. Like you should have a very structured way for how you present opportunities. You're always asking and answering the same questions for every deal so that they're not reoriented because they've got day jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so making it as easy to say yes, as easy to say no as possible is just better for everyone. And so it's consistency, structure, repeatability versus rebuilding the wheel each time. Even if you're only ultimately closing a few deals a year, I think it builds credibility to have a repeatable process and not have it be something new every time.
What do you do to get that standardization?
So it's as simple as having your standard investment, deck that you put together, the conceptual pro formas, which maybe we'll talk about, standard format of, answering key questions on what need to be true for, volumes, labor, top and bottom line, those things. You work really close with your operators on what they care about in a deal. And so you're always asking those questions and making sure that they get those answers, as well as having a good sense of, with your diligence team, integration team, like of what they need to know to determine the complexity of a deal. And so like we have like a 1, 2, 3 scale of how complex they are and, what are the various criteria for that? Because if you end up bringing too many high complex deals to the team, at some point you're going to run out of capacity and can't get them all done or can't get them all done well. And so it's to help you have to be aware of the pipeline, the portfolio at all times to make sure you're cognizant of, what else is going on. And sometimes, we've had great deals before us, but it's like, hey, we've got some other bigger stuff that, is really complex and, is more certain, and we'll try again later.
You mentioned, so it's like a lot of templating the process, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
What, you mentioned that conceptual performa. Can you talk me through what a conceptual performa is?
And I don't know if it's a term I came up with, and maybe you and I can trademark it. It came out
You heard it here first.
Yeah. It came out of, frankly, me being a little frustrated when I would put up something that was labeled pro forma, and then 5 years down the line, it would get brought up, usually after a deal went south. It's like, see, the pro forma said this. And it's me saying, this was really early days with no information. This was really the very first step to not even to say go, but to learn more. And so I called it conceptual pro forma so that it looked different, so that it was not the underwriting pro forma, right? The closing pro forma. And this was, the output was really basic, top, middle, bottom line, purchase price, diligence costs, IRR, NPV, payback time, all that stuff. A very basic, consistent format that was informed with a very basic one-page set of preliminary diligence questions that we ask everyone. That if you're doing it well, if you have all the data, it should take a really good analyst no more than a day to sort through the data, put together the rough valuation estimation, the guidance of what the seller is expecting, and then what would need to be true post-close to meet your hurdle rate. Very quick, low effort. You may reach out to the marketing team to figure out hey, if we need this to grow 10x in 10 years or 5 years, what kind of market share does that equate to? It's oh, and the marketing team says, oh, you'll need to have 75% of the market for this to be true. You say, oh, that's probably not going to happen. Or it's working with the recruiting team to say, hey, we're going to need to triple the workforce in 3 years. What's the recruiting environment like? And they say, oh, there's plenty of people available, or you're going to have to, I think one I looked at, it's you're going to have to hire the entire nursing workforce of the state of, Indiana for this to work, to pressure tests, all of those things, right? Again, it's about getting quickly to a no, or determine if there's a there under very conservative, post-close assumptions. And that's part of that sort of initial package that makes its way to the executive team. And so analyst puts that together in a day. And really the corp dev team, the analyst, me, work with the operator who's excited about the deal. And it's the operator presenting it to the exec team, with the support of corp dev, me, on, all the reasons they want to do it, but then supported with, some real finance along the way.
So this conceptual performa is almost like your what if scenario sort of planning tool.
I mean, and I'm sure everyone does their napkin math, right?
Yeah.
But it's structured, it's standard. Folks know what to expect. It's easy to sensitize for your what if scenarios, right? And you can put all, you can even Monte Carlo it if you want, which breaks people's brains, but you can get a sense of it. It's a very easy format to work with that people get, but then has beneath it, key assumptions on volumes, rates, overhead, that kind of stuff. I mean, it means you need to really know the model, the business model. It's harder to apply that to a brand new business that you're not in than one you're just adding on to. And so you need really good analysts who partner with the operators and can speak their language on what needs to go right, what can't go wrong for that deal to work.
In your industry, it is super people-oriented industry. How do you manage that transition to make sure you don't get
that's what it's all
people
about,
quitting on you?
Right. I mean, home healthcare is, the asset is the assembled workforce, I think is what they call it, right? And so it is the people who are taking care of people, and they have the relationships with the clients, with the other employees, with the referral sources that are sending business in. And so if they all leave before the deal, like, I don't know what you bought. And so it's all about the people. And so, and we've learned that the hard way. And we haven't perfected it, but I think we've gotten a lot better. And so it's not going to sound like rocket science, but it's about, winning hearts and minds of, the people who are transitioning, communicating at just the right time, which sometimes, states or localities will require you to notify people in certain timeframes, and you have to live within that world. But you want to tell people at the right time to inform them of the change, but not so far in advance that it doesn't mean anything to them, right? Telling them a year in advance of a deal happening, it either just spooks them or it doesn't really tell them anything. So telling them at the right time, maybe it's like 90 days beforehand. But then that's not just the communication. It is like, that's the start of like this warm hug of the acquiring organization of like, this is why this is a net positive for you. You're joining a big family, access to resources you've never had before. I mean, in BAYADA, it's a very stable, known name that's going to be around for 100 years, a permanent capital base, steady, stable leadership. It's, selling to them why it's good for them. And it works for some and hopefully most, right? I think what's interesting and what we found is, things that are coming to market, there's usually something going on, the business may be in decline and people are unhappy and are already thinking about leaving, and they hear about a deal and that's like the last straw for them, right? And they're going to leave anyway. You're looking for the people who are pretty loyal to the organization and who are, loyal to their patients, to their clients, loyal to their colleagues. And you want to tell that story of how this is just better for them. It's sure compensation is part of it. And there's ways to manage that, but it's about painting that vision of how this is, better for them than otherwise.
So really timing things right to let them know and emphasize the benefits. You ever had a deal blow up in your face? Be honest with me.
Yeah. No, I mean, stuff comes out of the woodwork.
Tell me about some deals that blow up your face. Story time here.
Yeah. And I think maybe it was your last question, but like, I don't know if it was a blow up, but it was like a big, like, I knew it. I told you so.
Yeah. You don't have to name names. I'm just curious, like what went down.
Yeah. And this one happened this year, I think. It was so in post-acute healthcare, and I think maybe hospitals, but definitely like in home health, hospice, skilled nursing facilities. A lot of states have this concept called a certificate of need, which is like your right to operate healthcare in a certain geography. Think of it as like your liquor license in Philadelphia or your taxi medallion in New York, right? Yep. It's a limited, thing that lets you operate. And states will allow you to apply for one, and sort of it's a public process. You kind of have to prove to them that another one needs to be issued. But there are some states where they've said, hey, there's enough providers in the market, and they're restricted. We're not going to issue any more. The only way you can get one is to buy one. And so it's like it's a moat, right? And so when they come on the market, it's rare. And when they do transact, it's usually privately. So there's like no public data about it. And so the only sort of way what they're worth is maybe what you paid for the last one.
Wow.
And so, but it's all really in the eye of the beholder, right? You're buying a right to operate, which, for one operator may be worth millions and another one may be worth tens of millions. Like it's all in the eye of the beholder. Anyway, what was crazy about this deal is one came up and it was for someone doing skilled nursing services, which is not a CON service usually. But they said they had a CON that was grandfathered in the 70s. That's like when the concept came about. And they were actually pricing there was a broker, a local broker, who said they'd done these before. We're pricing it based on, hey, this is a rare opportunity for a CON in this state. These never come up for market, and we're going to price it at some number. And so that was part of our strategy. And so great, like let's talk. Like this is a market we want to get into. But I think for ourselves, we're like, I think you're underpricing the CON, but great. Like that's a great, it's worth more to us than maybe you think it's worth to a typical buyer. But as we did our very early diligence, like we got the regulatory folks involved, and they were saying, I can't find record of, this company having this CON. I mean, which is normal, by the way. Like when folks were grandfathered in, the state sort of like told people, hey, you're good, but there was no piece of paper. Like some states have registries on these things that were on paper, extra credit if they put them on the web, even more extra credit if they keep them up to date. The only way that you sort of knew people have this ability to operate is if they were operating and no one had shut them down yet. It's kind of like a faith-based thing. Anyway, so we couldn't find any record of it. And we sort of asked the broker, like, hey, like, can you prove to us that you have this, certificate of need? And they said, well, no, it's not a piece of paper we're grandfathered in, but, we've got local counsel who guarantee that, we're grandfathered in, and whoever buys this, will be grandfathered into operating. So, they'll be good. And we said, great, like this is a very rare opportunity to get something for a good price. But along the way, we're like, okay, like, did they really know what they have? And I'm doing, side pricing of like the business, what they have, and the CON. And so I'm ready for it to price differently. And I think, 2 months of this go by of back and forth in research. And then the broker goes silent, for like 2 weeks. And then they come back and they said, it turns out we were wrong. We don't have a CON. We need to reevaluate valuation expectations. And we're so sorry. Thanks for talking with us. We'll reconnect in, a month or two. But so it was like this big, like, aha, we knew what we were talking about. I told you so. But it ended up, meaning a deal couldn't happen and there was nothing really to buy.
So you didn't buy it?
There was nothing to buy. Yeah. So we didn't close on it or even pursue anything with it. And so it wasn't a blow up per se, but
you ever had a deal blow up post close?
Blow up. So like, it's like didn't go well.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've had, so and this is where it gets into like, do you choose to like integrate quickly or slowly? Right. And, sometimes you're buying something where it's like, all right, they've got what they need to keep operating. There's no rush to integrate them or, onboard them onto your platforms. And then, you sort of hope that like they keep going on smoothly and then you can pace integration out in a nice way. And we did one where just like, the business was already in decline. It just kept on declining. And it was just, you're trying to catch that falling knife, right? And to stop it from falling, which is tough. And it was just one of those things where it just never recovered. Maybe it's turning around now, but it was, as things were falling, you realized you had to integrate to help slow things down, at least sort of fix like the bones of it. But kind of the damage had been done. And so it's, every deal, some of them have their thorns. That was one of the thorns. It wasn't a big blow up. It was just one of those where it's like we got more eyes wide open on businesses in decline and how you price them and how you set expectations with your own leadership post close. Because even if you price it incorrectly, to buy something and then still see a decline hurts, right? Even if it's like fully expected, right?
What's the philosophy now? Go integrate as fast as you can, or?
I think we like integrating quickly. Yeah. Cause you're balancing like how much change is too much change. Right. And so if you don't integrate quickly, the people on the receiving end of it, like there's the shock from change of ownership, which in a very people centric thing, like there's always a shock. And so if you integrate later, then there's this other shock, which like you hope that you're building up trust and credibility in the in-between. And that they're willing to like, sit with you through it and that they'll come out okay on the other side. I think we found that it's just better to rip the Band-Aid off and just go through it quickly and then just get that extra year of like turning things around.
Yeah, don't make it as more painful as it needs to be. Yeah. Rip the Band-Aid off. Can we talk about deal structure?
Sure.
You've done some cashless deals. Teach me how to do some cashless deals. Hey, everybody listen to this. You got a company to sell. I got a cashless offer for you.
Yeah, and this may be unique to nonprofit, maybe unique to home healthcare, but so it's probably one of the most beautiful things I've seen as an M&A person.
I dream about this all the time, John.
Sitting in yeah, I know, right?
Except I'm in a for-profit. But
I know that'd be ideal. And so, this goes to the heart of like why people do, start these businesses, right? It's a community benefit. They're helping, their peers in their community. They're hiring people and employing them. And, I think we've maybe done 3 of these in the past few years. And so it's not often, but it's possible. And so the founder is, maybe they're financially secure, but their business is going downhill and maybe it started to lose money, where their options are, close up shop and just send everyone to the wind, sell it to someone who's willing to pay something, or this other thing, which is like find a really good successor in the market. And so that's where, this is in markets where we're in and well known, where you're finding a great landing place for the employees and the clients after the fact. And so you don't really sign anything. It's kind of an agreement that like, we're going to be here to catch your employees, when you announce this. And so you do all the work for integration, you spin up your onboarding teams, your client transition teams, and you're there at the announcement of like, hey, like, we're here to, connect you to jobs. We're here to transition you onto the services, but no money is exchanging hands. And so you don't have a hurdle rate you're trying to meet. You're just trying to do what's right by everyone. And so the operators are engaged because, the cost of acquiring a employee or a client, is less, than when you're buying it. So they're engaged to do it right. But it really depends on, like the seller and kind of where they're at and how. Are they about evaluation or are they about continuity in their community? And so
that's what I'm interested in. Like, is it that scenario where it's like, there's not that much goodwill here. Like, it's probably not going to get much value anyways. So let's just.
Yeah. Or it's like, it's going to be so complicated or the deal costs are going to outweigh any value. Some of these they're usually pretty small. Like they're small deals. Like they probably would have transacted for under $1 million.
So, okay. So smaller deal. The main driver is more about a smoother continuity and just giving a greater good, hey, the mission's aligned.
Yeah.
We want a good transition for the people. All right.
Yeah. I don't know if you can do it, but
I don't know. If anybody has some ideas for me, let me know. Yeah.
But it's funny. Like it's always, especially when you're working with the founder, like we'll actually ask early kind of as a joke, or in jest about like, would you consider doing this for nothing? And then sometimes, they bite. Sometimes they laugh.
You kind of put dangle the bait there and see if it works.
Because going through diligence, going through, negotiations, like that it can be taxing on an organization.
It's a lot easier then if you have a cashless deal. Yeah. What are other levers that you have to pull on? Because you're not rolling over equity.
Yeah, right.
So that's out. Mm-hmm. You got owner financing, you got earnouts. What are levers that you're using?
Yeah, we haven't done a ton of earnouts. Especially with Medicare and Medicaid, like there's regulatory guardrails you have to watch out for that make that tough. And so usually it becomes into like continuity of employment. Ideally, if you've got a leader who's there, like it's, hey, you can come be a great leader and do even greater things, right? With BAYADA, and you can focus less on, payroll and like the not so fun stuff of running a business and focus on growth or focusing on helping your community. And so it's about removing distraction. If you're able to bring those people over to the organization, it's just, it's letting them sort of flourish post-deal. But if it's someone who's looking to retire after the fact, maybe it's, a good handoff to one of their relatives to come join the organization.
But you're not trying to retain that leadership for another 3 years or so?
Usually, if it's someone who's looking to retire, like they want to stay max 6 months.
So right? a lot of them are retire type of situations.
But if they're earlier in their career, it's like, and if it's a big enough business, that can support, the cost of them being a leader, it's come be a, leader of a division.
But then it's more of a retention versus trying to, because you're not keeping them on equity. Most of your deals are cash deals then.
Yeah, it's mostly, it's almost all cash. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. It's one or the other. Go cash, all cash or cashless.
That's right.
Pick one. Mm-hmm. Spin the wheel. We'll figure out how we're going to structure this.
Yeah.
The execution part. this is the thing I've noticed. You got to find the right deal that aligns with their strategy. That's given. But the execution, aligning your diligence and integration planning together, and something I know for a reason that you do really well. Can you talk me through that in terms of how you line that and how that sort of optimizes the successful integration?
Yeah, I mean, at BAYADA, the diligence integration team were the same team. And so there was...
Ooh, you guys heard that?
Same people. Like there's...
Right there, that solves 100 paper cut problems.
No, and I think like, through all of this, like there's none of the like throw the grenade over the wall to the next team to deal with, right? Right. Whether it's from corp dev to diligence to integration to ops, like there's no like handoff. Like everyone was organically, amorphously involved at just the right time. And so it's the same team. And so they know what they're looking for. For BAYADA, it was really structuring early diligence on, if there weren't any gating items to get through in like the pre-LOI stage, it was like, all right, what are your first, really big questions that you want to invest time and maybe external help into solving, get past those stage gates. But then it goes into integration planning, which again, in healthcare services is about the people stuff. And so it's heavy HR, job title mapping, finding a place for everyone, planning, plans for people who aren't going to make it, and making sure that communication strategy is solid, happening, well received, so that it's a smooth landing for everyone. And yeah, I mean, having continuity in the people involved, it's the same people from the sort of that core diligence team, but then it's also, at least at BAYADA, like all the functional leaders, like across all shared services, like it's the same people who are involved in deals. Sort of, they know what they're going to get out of the diligence team and the integration team versus, again, if we only close 1 or 2 deals a year and you're not doing it all the time, keep making sure that there's like, people don't forget how things get done. It's being consistent.
I see my marketing team slipped a question in this outline. That's what it says. It says, you're an early adopter of a buyer control process and use DealRoom to manage diligence. What impact did that have on speed, transparency, and seller experience? Yeah,
I mean, so that was, we were early days in that journey. And, before that, I think we were like every other one of your, pre-customers. It was spreadsheet madness, like tracking, here's the current status of questions. Here's what has received and hasn't. Trying to reconcile those things. Sometimes it's even the lawyers tracking them, and sort of they're billing you for managing your mess. And so yeah, I think I forget if we found you, you found us, but we love just the idea of a very easy interface. The concept of like linking your questions to your data room and your actual data room, files was big at the time. But really where I think it helped organize the sellers who were responding, so they're not just like seeing, a list in a spreadsheet. They see a nice slick tool that's secure, that they can grant access to the right people. And that they can hold themselves accountable to what's outstanding, what's been reviewed, what hasn't been, and so forth. I don't know if it's sped up the ability to, for a seller to answer the requests. I mean, they're always going to hunt and dig data, but at least it makes it very easy for them to keep track of what's going on. Where it really helped BAYADA was in the speed of review, flagging risks, issues, follow-ups. Like, it went from, a weekly meeting, diligence meeting of like, so what do people think? Anyone seeing anything that they don't like? To like very discreet, on this document, I don't like this. Or I know we asked for this and they said they provided it, but it's not what we need. And it's very transparent. You can stack it, rank it. And it also gets built trust in the organization on the deal team that you're running a very tight process, that you're not making it up every time. It's repeatable. It's standard. You're often asking the same questions. And we can all hold each other accountable to like either we're behind on the seller providing data. We're behind on reviewing things. We're behind on acknowledging that there's no risks. It just puts it all out there. There's nothing to hide behind. And especially when you're in early stages of a deal and an LOI, you're talking about how long diligence is going to take and you're posturing about how quickly it can go and those kinds of things. It really puts it out there when things are taking longer, why it's taking longer. And you're not arguing about it. You're both the buyer and seller are looking at the same dashboard on DealRoom about what's outstanding and what's not. And you can say like, this is why we're stuck. Wow. It could be on our side, could be you. And so if you've got someone in the middle, like, gatekeeping that information, just nobody trusts the process.
That's awesome, man. I can't even make up that stuff. Like, hey, I was just thinking that, you're right. You were one of our first like major healthcare companies, but that was like 6-7 years ago.
It had to be, it had, I think when I joined like the joint venture, it had to be 2019-ish. Yeah.
Yeah. So good 6 years ago. And I remember it because I learned so much about healthcare compliance.
Yeah. Oh, all that stuff. Yeah. I mean, very heavy security requirements and that kind of, thank you for suffering through that with us.
Well, we had to level up. I just want to say, and even the team involved, we were really thankful that you guys were so nice to work with because back then we were maybe 15, 20 people. Mm-hmm. So you guys were really like patient with us and we were scrambling and doing the best we could and we made it happen. That's really cool. And just to hear it from your view. So you got the system, you sort of create a lot of the workflows and hold some accountability, prioritization. And it sounds like it kind of, I guess I'm kind of curious from the seller point of view, because I feel like you got to early on, you got to build trust. And that's part of the alignment. Yeah. That's part of getting the deal structure. And then now you're getting this execution where you're actually, sort of using your approach and model. How does that part like impact the seller as you get through? Because I feel like that's when it gets tough. I've been on the other side of deals, and I remember there's one where I caught myself blowing up. I tried to be a nice, calm person, and people that know me know that. But there was like one of those deals where it was like the third time or maybe even fourth time of asking for the same document, and I lost it. But I'm kind of curious, like where how does that come in play as you execute through the deal? Does it like the process you describe? Is it creating more friction? Is there ways you're building trust? Like what are you doing?
No, it's. I think it's part of like the why the seller has chosen you, right? It's hopefully not solely based on valuation, but it's based on, you're going to do right by them, maybe financially, ideally in the process that you're not going to blow this thing up because the deal will blow up and you'll part ways, but then the seller's left with something broken. So nobody wants the deal to blow up at the last hour.
Oh,
right?
It's the worst.
Yeah. Nobody wins. And so like coming in with a very structured process that, you've done before, especially, for BAYADA, when you're in the small middle market, like the sellers, like they haven't done a lot of deals. Like maybe the founder is like, this is a second gig and they've done a deal before, but they don't do this every day. And so it can be intimidating, right? And, I think in early days, you'd send over like the diligence spreadsheet, right? With 1,000 things on it, right? And it's like, this is our diligence list. And, eyes wide open. And maybe, I don't know if that killed the deal, but it probably didn't feel good to be a seller to see that in front of you.
I don't know.
Because a lot of those things are rote and aren't even meant to answer specific questions. They're just kind of check the box, right? And so, when you're framing it with the seller, it's, you chose us for a reason. We have a process that works. It's very logical. It's very transparent. And it's ultimately, if this thing goes through, like it's the buyer taking on the risk, right? And so we want to make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible, and that can only go well if we're in the driver's seat, right? I really don't know any other way. And maybe if we got the sense of like a seller not wanting to go that way, we probably wouldn't want to work with them. And so
give them the heads up you're going to drive the process. Do you warn them that, hey, this is going to be painful?
We probably don't say painful, but it's
excruciating.
It's work. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's asking questions that you wish you didn't have to answer. You're trying to unbury the skeleton sometimes, right? But
taking the skeletons, the relationship with
and this is where
warning them about the work.
Having the same team work with them the whole way through is helpful, right? And so you build a good, stable partnership between the seller. For us, corp dev is definitely very heavy on the front end, but then we have them, along the way in lesser capacity.
The sort of modern thinking about M&A, there's the concept of integration-led diligence.
Yeah.
Do you think, would you consider what you're describing
everything is about answering the questions you need to answer to integrate well.
So it's integration-led diligence.
Yeah.
Testimony.
But that's because I think, the nature of, BAYADA, it's like you're buying to run it for forever. It's not a purely like, hey, how much money is this thing making? How much can we sell it for? Good or bad?
Yeah.
I haven't done a deal like that.
I wanted to pick your brain on one of the things you mentioned about like buying the declining business. When you kind of mentioned that as an example, what did you learn from that? Because I'm looking at some deals right now where they're declining businesses. How do you get the sense of a true turnaround potential versus your own deal fever hype thing going on?
Yeah, I know. That's what's...
when do you say yes to that? When do you walk away or run away?
I think we're BAYADA's decided to maybe change the perspective, but it definitely got into... You can't assume that, if you've got something that's, growing over time or declining over time, you have to be ready for it to decline faster.
Interesting.
And so that gets into like your conceptual pro forma. And for some of these, it's like, how bad could this go? And over what time period are you willing to wait for it to recover? Which for BAYADA can be a while. Like I think we looked at some where it's like, hey, let's assume we're going to lose 30% top line and take 5 years to recover it. Like, and we'll manage margin along the way. Like, does that still work? Because it's a deal we still want to do for all the other softer reasons. And so, you're, again, like your downside scenario, which maybe your super conservative base case, assumes that. And we definitely, if it's a declining business, it's, we have a few, points on the line to understand attrition rates and those kinds of things, to have some informed, first year, and then how long it takes to turn things around, like what the work actually is to turn things around. But that's the benefit of the nonprofit, is like you can wait and you can take time, but it has to make sense. But you try to price it in, and that's like where, again, having a third party appraiser come in is an interesting wrinkle into it, because, every, arm's length buyer wants, says they're going to turn something around. And then you're arguing about, some hypothetical buyer and what they would hypothetically do to turn things around, and whether it's practical, whether it's what you would do, whether it's what the seller would do. And you're arguing about, a ghost, essentially. And that's where it gets, even if you can get if you can get it priced right, and that's incorporated into the price, or it ends up being, a steal, it still hurts to have a business, sort of show up on your books that's declining. And so that's why, like, that conceptual and like that real underwriting pro forma, like, you have to constantly track against, yep, we knew we were going to be this low 6 months in. Yep, we knew it was going to take this long for this to break even, 10 months in. It's on track, even if it's like not doing well. You kind of just have to ground people to the commitments they made, and just make sure you've got a really tight lock on what people signed up for at the get-go.
Catching the falling knife without cutting yourself. I like your point. Like, don't get optimistic that the decline's going to stop, that even plan worst case, that it could actually accelerate. So anybody listening, especially if I'm looking at your business, I'm going to turn that valuation down a turn. Because there's one I'm looking at where it's declining revenue, and it's hard.
And especially,
of course they look at headlines and like, well, they're getting this multiplier. I'm like, well, they're going up. They're not going down.
Yeah. No, and it may just be that the industry, it's really hard to turn that ship, because it's not just the business itself, it's everything around it that may be pushing it to decline, right? And it's not just something that you can fix. and really quickly.
Yeah. Is there, I mean, have you seen the rule of thumb of how much you would, it's just, we're in different industries. So software is so different. But when I look at declining software, I look at that as like a really big issue.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't.
No rules of thumb. Like we have a few.
I'm going back to the cashless transaction on those deals.
Right. No, I mean, that's sometimes the pitch. It's like, hey, like, this thing, it's losing, the talk track. It's like, you're losing money on this. Like, you may probably need to throw more cash into it. Wouldn't you rather just cut bait and have a great experience for your staff? Right. I mean,
I'm putting you on my deal team, man. You can come, we'll go work on some things together. I like that. I like that approach. Maybe that'll help me bridge my, my valuation gap. Advice, lessons learned, for M&A leaders listening, trying to build a buyer-led engine, especially if they're in a highly regulated, people-driven industry like yours. But what have you learned?
Like doing the right thing, usually it always pays off. Like everyone sort of knows. Like if you're trying to pull one under or trade on asymmetric information or anything like that, it builds trust, credibility. It makes the deal go smoother. It's just always worked out. It's when deals where, someone was hiding something on either side. Something comes out of the woodwork, or someone had different intentions, or was, trying to do something the wrong way, where the deal blows up, or it's like not good after the fact. And so it can be really tough conversations. And I know definitely, again, it's people centric. And so like doing right by the people who are involved in the deal, like, is what matters. And so I can't understate that. Probably learned it some of the hard way, but, and maybe it's not available to everyone who are doing deals, but I definitely found it to work out that way.
Do the right thing.
It's easy.
For some people I can see, there are people out there there are people out there that can't, for some reason, struggle. I don't know. How do you explain that? Maybe you got access to some healthcare research of just some people are just wired to sort of do the wrong thing.
Maybe it's about wiring. Yeah.
Yeah. I found that sucks too when you got to work on deals with folks that really
that don't align. Yeah, I mean that can kill it.
They're just not capable of doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole other discussion. If anybody's listening to this and wants to talk about that, of doing deals with somebody that's incapable of doing the right thing, you know what I'm talking about. People that catch them in their fibs and things like that, and they blow all trust and credibility, but you still want to buy that asset.
You still want to buy it, yeah. It can be tough.
And I'm trust me, I got one. I'm hitting my head on the wall. It's because I don't want to, coming from my background, I've done the advisory side. I don't want to do that deal, but then there's a strong business case, and you're like,
yep, I know that.
Your team wants to do it.
Yep.
Yeah. So, anyways, anybody wants to come reach out to me. I got to ask you, what's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
I feel like I gave you a few crazy ones.
I need the craziest. Give me the skeleton. Let me.
Yeah. No, I mean, the one where like the broker didn't know they had nothing to sell was probably my favorite.
You gotta
yeah. The next one, it has to do with people who didn't want to do the right thing. I remember we were looking at one, and it was someone in a market we're already in, very long tenured, pillar of the community. Was looking for that right successor, but wanted monetary, associated with it. And like it was declining business. We were trying to price stuff in. They wanted so many post-deal hooks on, how you were what kind of quality requirements you were going to get to in healthcare. You get publicly rated, by Medicare. You have to hit certain quality marks, all these things that like, ultimately are good, but it's like, that's for, me, the buyer, to deal with. So many requirements. And even with that, we still wanted to do the deal. And that's at way too late in diligence, it turns out that we found out they had taken a big loan from COVID, from the government. They hadn't paid it back. And it was one of those loans you have to pay back. And we sort of found it, and we said, so this stays with you, right? You've got a foundation. Like nope, that you got to take that loan and you got to pay it back. And the loan payback was like 3x the valuation that they wanted. So they basically wanted us to take on this crazy liability, instant net negative net present value.
And this came up post LOI.
Yeah, it was post LOI. Yeah, it was like we were like really far down the line.
So it blew up the deal?
Oh, we're like, no thanks. Yeah, just blew it up right then and there. It's like, and you also got a sense of like the kind of folks they were.
But they didn't. They didn't tell you any of this. It didn't show up on any of the balance sheet.
Well, we learned no. and that now we know to ask.
Sure, skeletons.
Yeah, like give us all your federal relief loan history and all that kind of stuff. You learn from that, and that was just us learning, right? And especially in that time, we were all learning about that. It's that kind of stuff. But it was the fact, it was all those things added up with them. It's like, oof, like,
wow,
I don't want to be a partner with you if you're going to try to saddle me with this last minute. And then you also wanted all these post-close hooks that, we were still going to be in the community together. We said, nope, we're done. Sorry.
Wow, that's wild. That's crazy. John, this has been a great conversation.
This was a hoot.
Thanks.
So,
thanks for coming down and sharing the experience. We should have done more. It's been all these years we worked together, and finally got you here.
I needed some time to build some good stories, so it was good to wait.
I know you were always busy. That was the other thing. Yeah, but I really appreciate you taking the time, helping me become a better M&A scientist. If you've listened this far, congratulations! You are an M&A scientist. You'd love to hear from you, especially people that get this far on the podcast. So reach out to me. You're more than welcome and invited to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Love to connect with you. I'm a little weary if you ask me for a bunch of big favors because I get way too many, I don't know. It's just like I run a business on the side here. But I do love the feedback. I'll take the criticism too. I try to get better at this. Any topic ideas are always helpful. So with that, till next time, here's to the deal.
Here's to the deal.